At its height, Rome funneled enough Egyptian grain to feed 200,000 citizens each month, and Persia's royal road moved gold across 2,600 kilometers in under 9 days. These empires thrived on money, trade, and logistics, not just military conquest. So why did such economic machines eventually unravel? And what invisible forces doomed even the mightiest civilizations? To answer that, we have to follow the flows of power and resources from their origins. In the heart of the Achaemenid Empire, Darius I's administrators set out to solve a problem that had dogged every conqueror before them: how to knit together lands stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Aegean Sea. The answer ran nearly 2,600 kilometers across mountains, rivers, and deserts. It was the Royal Road. Relay stations dotted the route, each one stocked with fresh horses and supplies, staffed by postmasters known as Pyradasis. A royal courier could race from Susa to Sardis in just 7 to 9 days, a journey that would take a merchant on foot more than 3 months. That speed was not just for messages. It was the backbone of imperial control, allowing orders, tribute, and intelligence to flow across the empire with a reliability unknown in the ancient world. But speed alone could not bind together dozens of languages, customs, and currencies. Darius's reforms brought a new kind of uniformity centered on the daric, a gold coin weighing about 8.4 grams, minted to exacting standards around 520 BCE. Its purity was legendary. Merchants, soldiers, and satraps alike trusted the daric's value from Egypt to India. Tribute collected in distant provinces could be converted into coins accepted everywhere along the royal road, making it possible to pay armies, bribe rivals, and fund construction from a single treasury. Satraps, regional governors, became the empire's fiscal backbone. Each was responsible for collecting fixed quotas of silver, grain, or livestock, enforced by royal inspectors and backed by the threat of rapid military intervention thanks to the road. The combination of relay logistics and monetary standardization made the Persian state more than just a patchwork of conquered lands. It became a system able to move gold, goods, and information faster and more predictably than any rival. Tribute was not just a tax, it was the fuel that kept the empire's engine running, and it set a model for every imperial economy that followed. Every morning in imperial Rome, the city's survival depended on a silent armada crossing the Mediterranean, a lifeline for the capital. Hundreds of ships loaded with Egyptian grain sailed into Ostia and Portus, their holds heavy with wheat destined for the heart of the empire. The Annona, Rome's state-run grain supply, fed nearly 200,000 urban residents each month. It was an operation on a scale unmatched in the ancient world. Behind this lifeline stood the Praefectus Annoni, a powerful official who managed contracts, inspected cargoes, and enforced quotas. But the real workhorses were the navicularii, ship owners compelled by law into collegia, or guilds. Membership was not voluntary. The state drafted ship owners into these associations, binding them to deliver grain under threat of heavy penalties. In return, navicularii received privileges, exemption from certain taxes, legal protections, and in some cases, hereditary status for their children. Still, the risks were steep. Storms, piracy, and shipwrecks could ruin fortunes overnight, yet the empire's hunger left little room for excuses. The annual flow from Alexandria to Rome was staggering, well over 100,000 tons of grain each year, most of it harvested along the Nile. Rome's Horea, massive granaries near the Tiber, stored those imports before rationing them out to citizens. The Annona's monopoly on staple foods gave the state enormous leverage. With bread as the anchor of the urban diet, emperors could reward loyalty or quell unrest simply by adjusting the grain dole. Far beyond the Mediterranean, the same networks that carried wheat also ferried silk, spices, and ivory from as far as Han China. Rome's economic reach extended along caravan trails and sea routes, connecting the city's appetite to distant harvests and distant markets. The empire's power rested not just on legions, but on the steady, institutionalized flow of grain. It was a system so vital that its collapse would one day threaten the city itself. In the Roman Republic, the power to tax was auctioned to the highest bidder. Wealthy citizens, known as publicani, paid for the right to collect taxes in the provinces, gambling that they could squeeze more revenue from the locals than they had promised to Rome. The system was simple on paper. The Senate set a quota. Contracts went to the top bid, and the publicani sent their agents out to collect. In practice, the gap between Rome's interests and the profit motive of its contractors opened the door to abuse. The province of Sicily became a cautionary tale. In the 70s BCE, Cicero stood before the courts in Rome, reading letters and testimonies from Sicilian farmers. Their grain, meant for the city's bread supply, was being seized at inflated rates or withheld altogether by agents of Gaius Verres, the governor. Verres, in league with the publicani, manipulated the auctions and falsified records, demanding more than the legal quota. When farmers protested, they faced threats, imprisonment, or ruin. Cicero's Verrine orations painted a vivid picture: barns emptied, fields abandoned, a province bled dry, not by foreign enemies, but by Rome's own system. The scandal did more than embarrass a governor. It exposed a flaw at the heart of the Republic's fiscal machine: the principal agent problem. Rome needed steady revenue, but its agents had every reason to overcharge and underreport. The Senate debated reforms, but the damage to Rome's reputation lingered. In Sicily and beyond, trust in Roman rule began to erode. What started as a clever way to fund expansion became a source of instability, setting the stage for later emperors to take taxation out of private hands. Augustus came to power in a city battered by civil war and fiscal chaos. Instead of relying on private tax farmers, he established a new order: imperial procurators, loyal to the emperor alone, collected taxes across the provinces. Every 5 years, a census swept through the empire, counting not just citizens but property, livestock, and slaves. This information powered a more predictable system. Provincial wealth was taxed at a steady 1%, while a poll tax brought in revenue from non-citizens. With the census as his tool, Augustus could tighten Rome's grip on its territories, funding legions and public works from a central treasury. The early imperial reforms brought a sense of stability, but the system would face greater strains. By the late 3rd century, economic pressures mounted. Military costs soared, inflation crept in, and the old fiscal machinery began to falter. Diocletian, ruling from 284 CE, responded with a wave of emergency measures. He ordered another empire-wide census, this time extending even to Italian landowners who had long enjoyed exemption. New taxes landed on land and individuals, calculated with a precision that left little room for evasion. The bureaucracy swelled as officials tracked every field, every laborer, every animal. In 301 CE, Diocletian issued the Edict on Maximum Prices. The document listed more than 1,000 goods, from wheat and wine to oxen and boots, each with a fixed price ceiling. Violators faced severe penalties. but the edict proved almost impossible to enforce. Market inspectors struggled to keep up, and goods vanished from stalls as sellers found ways to sidestep the rules. The state's grip tightened, but cracks began to show. The arc from Augustus's measured reforms to Diocletian's desperate controls charts the evolution of imperial finance, from careful restructuring to the blunt force of emergency command. On the ground, the Roman Empire's reach depended not just on ships or coins, but on stone and sweat. Roads like the Via Appia, begun in 312 BCE, cut through the Italian countryside, linking Rome to distant provinces with a new kind of precision. Roman engineers calculated every gradient, rarely allowing slopes to exceed 8%. This careful design meant that carts and supply wagons could move year-round, even in rain or mud. For the legions, it was a revolution. Soldiers on the march could cover up to 25 kilometers in a single day, their boots hitting the same flat, paved stones that had carried armies and officials before them. The labor behind these arteries was immense. Legionaries doubled as road crews, laying gravel, hewing stone, and setting curbs under the watchful eyes of military engineers. Each finished stretch bore a milestone, inscribed with the names of consuls or emperors and the distance to Rome. Oversight fell to the curatores viarum, officials tasked with inspecting, repairing, and funding these routes. Their records tracked every expense, from crushed rock to the wages of laborers and the cost of timber for bridges. These roads bound the empire together, shrinking distances and tightening control. They slashed the cost of moving goods, enabled rapid deployments, and stitched together far-flung markets. But the benefits came with a price. The system's scale demanded constant maintenance, repairs after floods, patrols against bandits, and fresh paving for worn stretches. The treasury's ability to fund this maintenance became a silent test of imperial strength. When money flowed, the roads hummed with life. When coffers ran dry, cracks spread, and the empire's hold on its provinces began to loosen. Portus, Rome's artificial harbour at the mouth of the Tiber, was more than an engineering marvel. It was the empire's main artery for survival. At its peak, Portus could receive up to 400,000 tons of grain each year, ferried from the fields of Egypt and North Africa. Harbour officials coordinated the arrival of fleets, managed customs, and oversaw the unloading of cargoes into sprawling storage complexes. Every shipment triggered a race against spoilage and theft. Inspectors logged each vessel's manifest, while porters hustled sacks from ship to warehouse. The granaries themselves, known as horea, lined the riverbanks and city outskirts. Some, like the horea galbae, could hold up to 10,000 tons of grain in vaulted chambers, their brick walls designed to keep out moisture and rodents. The massive Porticus Aemilia, stretching nearly half a kilometre, stored enough wheat to feed 1 million people for weeks. Each vault was a buffer against famine, a silent insurance policy for the city's restless masses. But grain was only part of the story. The empire's appetite for precious metals powered its coinage, armies, and trade. Across the Aegean, the Laurian mines in Attica had once yielded up to 30 tons of silver a year at their height, funding not only Athens' warships, but setting a standard for imperial extraction. Roman mines in Spain and the Balkans followed the same logic. Dig deeper, extract more, and keep the cash flowing to Rome. State officials auctioned mining rights, tracked quotas, and counted every ingot that reached the treasury. The flow of silver and grain, measured, guarded, and taxed at every step, made possible the scale of Rome's ambitions. Without these hubs and stockpiles, the machinery of empire would grind to a halt. exposing just how much depended on the steady movement of ships, sacks, and ore. A wave of disease swept across the Roman Empire in 165 CE, leaving cities silent and fields untended. The Antonine Plague, described by Galen, killed as much as a third of the population in some regions. Fewer workers meant fewer taxpayers, and imperial revenues collapsed. Payroll records from Egypt show entire units missing from the rolls, their names replaced by blank spaces or the word mortus. As the tax base shrank, the costs of defending the empire soared. Between 235 CE and 260 CE, pay for frontier soldiers doubled. The treasury struggled to keep pace. Imperial mint officials, under pressure to stretch dwindling reserves, began shaving silver from the denarius. Metallurgical assays of coin hoards from the 260s reveal a shocking decline. Under Gallienus, the silver content dropped to about 5%, the rest made up by bronze and a thin wash of silver. The coins looked the part, but their value drained away with every new issue. Inflation spiraled. Soldiers and suppliers demanded more coins to match rising prices, but the new money bought less at the market. Hordes of older, purer coins disappeared from circulation as people clung to what still held value. The empire's officials recorded the numbers, but the math no longer added up. With every debased coin, trust in Rome's money and in its future eroded a little further. By the late 3rd century, the Mediterranean's arteries began to clog. Archaeologists have counted a sharp decline in shipwrecks, a drop of more than 60% from the 2nd to the 4th century. Once crowded sea routes fell silent as fewer merchant vessels risked the journey. The Isola del Giglio wreck, dated to the early 3rd century, is one of the last of its kind, loaded with North African amphorae and luxury goods. After that, the evidence thins. Fewer shipwrecks mean fewer goods moving between provinces. The Oxyrhynchus papyri from Egypt echo the same trend. Contracts for long-distance trade become rare, while records of local transactions multiply. Without the steady pulse of imported grain, wine, and oil, Roman towns turned inward. Rural estates managed by a new class of landed elites grew more self-reliant. The state responded by binding tenant farmers called coloni to the land, as late Roman laws made it nearly impossible for them to leave. Estate owners became the new power brokers, collecting taxes in kind and overseeing local justice. The economic vacuum left by shrinking trade was filled by these sprawling estates, each one a miniature world insulated from the chaos beyond its borders. The fragmentation is written into the laws themselves. Imperial edicts from the 4th century detail the obligations of colony, the privileges of rural magnates, and the mounting difficulties of supplying the cities. What once was a network stretching from Spain to Syria now splintered into isolated pockets of survival. The empire's unity, once measured in the flow of ships and goods, faded into a patchwork of self-sufficient domains. In the autumn of 476 CE, the last Western Roman emperor, a boy named Romulus Augustulus, was forced to abdicate by the Germanic general Odoacer. The event is often cited as the end of the Roman Empire in the West, a single date stamped in chronicles and textbooks. Yet the collapse was neither sudden nor simple. Ancient sources, like the 6th century historian Procopius, described cities emptied of trade and law, and the chronicler Marcellinus comes recorded the fading of Roman authority in a few terse lines. Modern historians continue to debate what the fall of Rome truly meant. Brian Ward Perkins, drawing on archaeological finds such as broken pottery, abandoned villas, and a sharp drop in imported goods argues for a material catastrophe. He points to evidence of economic breakdown. Coin hoards dry up, and the once bustling markets grow silent. For Ward Perkins, the end of empire brought real hardship, as standards of living and urban life collapsed across the West. Others, such as Peter Heather, look beyond economics to the pressures of migration and security. He sees the arrival of Gothic and other barbarian groups not as a symptom, but as a cause, military and political shocks that overwhelmed even a resilient system. The debate stretches from the pages of ancient chronicles to the trenches of modern excavation, with each new find raising fresh questions. Was it inflation, plague, and fiscal exhaustion that toppled Rome, or the armies at its gates? The answer remains elusive, tangled in layers of evidence and interpretation. What is clear is that the end was not a single event, but the unraveling of a world built on centuries of economic and social complexity. Every global power today leans on the same pillars: trade, resources, and fiscal trust that once held up ancient empires. Yet, economic strains topple even the most enduring systems. As national debts surpass $300 trillion worldwide and supply chains grow fragile, history warns that economic strength is never permanent. The next rise or fall may already be underway. Share your thoughts below and join the conversation.